Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Today I have for you a layout process video featuring using sketches. Now I say sketches, I will only use one, but I do have two options in front of me, and both of these are part of my Scrap Happy membership group, and we have a sketch a month, only we've been a little behind, so we have two sketches this month. And they're both single photo sketches, so I decide that I do have a story that I can tell with a single photo. Now I don't always follow the photo guidelines when I'm using a sketch, however this time, since I had a photo that fit, I will go ahead and do that single photo. And I'm just cleaning it up a little bit because my printer it doesn't print a nice even border around it, so I got that set up. And then I pull out a bin of supplies that was sitting next to me from a previous project, and I start looking through these supplies to see if they will work for this story. And I start with these chipboard frames, and I really like that this frame in particular has a dual windows to it, so it will show both my daughter and what she's doing in that frame, and what she's doing is important to this story. So yes, I decide this selection of products from Pink Fresh Studio, by the way, will work for this story. And I start looking for a background paper because that's how I usually start. And both of these sketches have kind of a neutral background paper, but I choose this multi-word paper because it has a lot of phrases on there that fit with this story. Once I have that chosen, I did choose the sketch with the hexagons because I like the artsy, hands-on feeling that has, and that has a lot to do with my story. And then I have this cover sheet from the collection pack, and I know I want to punch that with hexagons. So those shrunk down patterns are great for this kind of technique. And so that just confirms for me that I want to use that hexagon sketch. And when I'm looking at the sketch, I have to decide how I want to interpret the sketch towards my own layout. I could reverse the flow of the hexagons. I could do the hexagons straight up and down. But because the phrases that I'm highlighting on this paper fit with the original sketch, I'm going to go ahead and leave it as is. So I grab an elongated hexagon die from a Concord and 9th set, and I grab a very mild-mannered pattern paper to cut these hexagons out of. Now these are just tiny hexagon frames, and as I'm looking at this, I know those frames aren't showing up very well, so I have a couple things to do in order to get them to show up better, because I do want those phrases to stand out quite a bit on this layout. One way I'm going to do that is by toning down the background, and I'm going to cover up part of the background with some modeling paste. You could do this with just regular white paint or gesso, something along those lines, but I have this texture paste and I'm not using it enough because it's starting to get dried up on me, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and use that, and I like the textural feel of just playing with it. So here's what I do to help keep my paste from drying out. I learned this tip recently from someone else, and I just spritz it with some water, mix it in to make sure there's no dry bits at the top, and then cover it with plastic and seal it up. So that should do the trick in prolonging the lifespan of that product. I am ready to move on to the next step of getting these hexagons to be more prominent, and I die cut some foam to layer behind them to help pop them up. I glue the foam onto the paper because the foam can stretch, and when I glue it to the paper, that helps hold it shape better. And so I got all of those glued and set aside while the glue is drying and the texture paste is drying. I turn my attention to punching out a million hexagons, and there I have that big pile of hexagons set aside and ready to go. I turn to my photo next. I want to help the photo stand out more from the background, so I am going to go ahead and matte it with a few contrasting colors. Because the background is a light color, I definitely want a very dark color as the background matte layer. And then I start playing with that, arranging the hexagons to see how I want these things to flow. I'm trying to keep my hexagons contained to that white swath that I made with the texture paste, and I'm finding that there's not quite enough room to do what I want to do. I know I want to leave some hexagons empty to decorate up in other ways, but these hexagons aren't standing out enough to me. So I turn to some inking of edges to see if that will do the trick. And I also decide I'm going to pop them up on some foam to help them just stand out more. And both of those tips actually made it work out pretty well. I just did a small sample with 3 of the hexagons to see if that was going to do it for me. Once I decide that is the case, I go ahead and do all the rest of my hexagons, both inking and popping them up on foam. While all that glue is drying for those hexagons, I go ahead and go back to my elongated hexagons, get those glued down to the background paper. I get my photo attached down. I decide it needs to pop up on some foam also because of the lumpy bumpy texture of the texture paste. Between all of these steps, I feel like my layout is finally pulling together and well represented by the sketch I started off with. I do add those chipboard pieces to my photo, the frame around the subject of the photo, and since the photo is a little busy, I'm going to cover up some of that busyness with embellishments. And since that is done, I go ahead and work on getting all of those hexagons glued down. Like I said, I am going to leave a few spots open. Now here I am with the finishing bits of my hexagon flow down the side, and here is a final step I'm doing to help those elongated hexagons stand out a little bit more. And instead of inking the edges because they're so thin and narrow, I'm going to go ahead and do some pin work around the inside and the outside to help those be more visible. I added just a few extra embellishments around this photo because the layout is pretty busy, so it doesn't need a lot more going on. Now here is what I did with some of those empty hexagon spaces. I filled them in with some embellishments, and in this case it's just a couple of chipboard circles. I go ahead and turn to my title. I did really have a hard time figuring out what I wanted to do with this title, and I pulled out this alphabet set that was missing most of the letters I needed. And I know I've said this before, but I'm getting so frustrated with buying pre-made alphabet sets and just running out of the things that I need. And so while I've started making some of my own alphabets, that process is a little overwhelming also. I don't have a good solution. So if you have a good solution, you can let me know. Okay, I've got some journaling done here, and I'm looking at my layout overall view, and I'm realizing those hexagons, again, aren't standing out as much as I want them to. So I come in with some additional texture paste, and that also is going to give me a good spot to attach my little tiny journaling tab down at the bottom. Now, through this texture paste process, if it's not drying fast enough because I'm impatient, I will hit it with a heat gun, and that really does speed up the process. So if you like the idea of these mixed media layouts, I do recommend a heat tool. And the Ranger one really is a good one for this because it is quiet and it is low force, so it's not going to feel like it blows your project away. So that is it for this time. I think I captured the playful spirit of this sketch, both in the story of my daughter doing her own scrapbooking and in the techniques I used to create this layout. So let me know in the comments below, do you like sketches? Do you struggle with sketches? What is your relationship with sketches? I'd love to start a conversation on this topic so that we can keep the inspiration flowing. I will be back next time with a non-scrapbooking layout, so I hope you will join me then to see what I have in store. Until then, have an artful day.